So last month in my Google alerts was a maladaptive daydreaming test that is 99.99% accurate. Bold claim for an online quiz. So I thought it would be fun to go through. I did some tests, a couple of like maladaptive daydreaming tests forever ago. And those were fun. Those were fun. So we're going to do it again. At the top, I want to let you know that it does not matter what the result of this test is. We are not testing out its accuracy claim. We know that it's not accurate. We know that online mental health tests are silly. What I try to do on this channel is take content like this and expand on it just to just to give you a better idea of maladaptive daydreaming in general. All right, so the description is pretty brief. I'm just going to run through it, read it for you real quick. Everyone daydreams. It's a normal process that happens to everyone. But some people daydream more excessively than others. According to the Maladaptive Daydreaming Test, certain telltale signs work to determine if your daydreams are unusual. In most cases, casual daydreaming is not an issue, but when it starts to hamper the quality of your everyday life, it can become a problem. This is mainly because people who suffer from maladaptive daydreaming, MAD, can fail to differentiate their real lives from their fantasy lives. This maladaptive daydreaming quiz will try to detect some signs and symptoms of MAD through a series of questions. Please answer them as accurately and honestly as possible for the most credible results. Okay, a couple good things in there, a couple bad things right off the bat. Number one, yes, I think it's great that they point out that everyone daydreams, and then, a little further down, they're saying in most cases, casual daydreaming, totally fine. It's only a problem if it's a problem, right? So it's very much exactly something that they should have said and exactly something that they did say. For the bad, they make reference to a maladaptive daydreaming test, but they don't cite their source on that, so I have no idea what they're talking about. I assume they mean the maladaptive daydreaming scale, the MDS-16, but I don't know. They didn't say that that's what they were talking about. I actually think that's probably better for a test like this. I think it would be disingenuous of them to to cite things like that, to cite real clinical measures and give you the sense that their test is just as good as a real clinical measure, which it isn't. So maybe it's for the best that they didn't bother explaining or citing what that is. The big problem here is the end of that sentence can fail to differentiate their real lives from their fantasy lives. That's not something that happens in maladaptive daydreaming. That's just straight up wrong. Maladaptive daydreamers retain, oh, what's it called? Reality monitoring. We have intact reality monitoring. We know the difference between our daydreams and our reality. And that difference, that juxtaposition, is often a key source of distress for the maladaptive daydreamer. So not only is this wrong right in the introduction to this quiz, but it is catastrophically wrong. It fundamentally misunderstands what maladaptive daydreaming is and why it is distressing. Question one, the ads on this site, like, I'm just going to tell you right now, even if you think that this is a fun little test that you would like to try out and have a good time with yourself, like, don't bother. The ads are ridiculous. I am not confident that I won't get a virus from this. All right, do you spend a lot of time daydreaming? Yes, a considerable chunk of my time daydreaming. I do spend a lot of time, but not all day. Maybe once or twice a month, or I don't daydream at all. All right, I understand why they're asking this question, but we just want to say to the audience, if you think you might have maladaptive daydreaming, there is no magical number that you need to hit to be considered a maladaptive daydreamer. It's really more the quality of time rather than the quantity. So you might daydream a lot less than other people, but you're daydreaming at times or for reasons or in a way that is just really not good for you, and that makes it maladaptive. No magical number. Secondly, this test did not tell us what daydreaming is. They did not define their terms. So if you are coming in not knowing if the type of daydreaming that you have is unusual, their word, then how do you even begin to answer this question? because daydreaming, it's one of those words that everybody sort of understands, but if you ask people to define it, and that's where it gets a little dicey. Are we including any off-task thought or mind wandering? Are we including little flights of fancy? Are we only talking about deep fantasy? Are we only talking about deep immersive fantasy, which is the type that maladaptive daydreamers really do? This question just glosses right over all of that. So I feel like this really can't be answered in any meaningful way. How much in detail do you remember your dreams to be? I remember everything about my dreams in graphic detail. I remember it clearly. I hardly ever remember it. I don't even daydream in the first place. So at first it sounds like they're talking about night dreaming, which I don't believe there are any papers on. I don't think we have any way to know that, or any way to measure if you might be a maladaptive daydreamer through that. But then one of the one of the answers is I don't even daydream in the first place. So I feel like one of those is a typo and I don't know which. So I'm a little not sure how to answer that one. I'm going to guess that they meant daydreaming. That makes more sense to me. How many times a day do you usually catch yourself daydreaming? Almost 3 to 4 times a day, maybe once every day. I daydream once every couple of months, or I don't remember my last daydream. Another weird one that I'm not really sure where they're getting this from. Does it matter how many times a day you catch yourself daydreaming? If you're a maladaptive daydreamer, or if you're trying to figure out if you're a maladaptive daydreamer, I think the more important question would be like, how often can you not pull yourself out of a daydream? Because you can catch yourself. You can catch yourself 100 times a day. And as long as you can, you know, refocus on the thing that you want to actually be focused on, then it's really not a problem, is it? So that's a weird question. Yeah. So far, they're all kind of weird, and we're only on what, number 4 coming up here? Do you think you can't go out and socialize because of your habit of daydreaming? Yes, I find it very difficult. Yes, but not all the time. No, daydreaming just does not affect my social life, or it has never affected me that way. Maladaptive daydreamers do have a tendency, in general, to isolate themselves socially. It's um, it's part of this spiral that's been documented. I believe it's in the paper titled Childhood Antecedents. If you want to go look that up, there's like a it's like a flow chart, I think, of this. But it's a thing that researchers have talked about where sort of a cycle that maladaptive daydreamers will tend to fall in is that they will ease their discomfort or something with daydreaming, which is satisfying to them. So they will choose daydreaming over other things, often over social things, because daydreaming is not really compatible with socializing. So they'll sort of isolate themselves a bit. They'll turn down an invitation, they'll shy away from a gathering or whatever to be on their own to daydream. And then they feel isolated and that upsets them. So they daydream, more to get rid of those negative feelings. It's a unfortunate cycle that we find ourselves in. I think this is worded a weird way, like it's a real thing that happens, but it's worded very strangely. Do you think you can't go out? I think maladaptive daydreamers think more often, probably, that they can go out, but what's the point? There's an amount of misanthropy and melancholy, sort of, that creeps into your life during this cycle. That makes you feel like it's not worth it, so why bother? I don't that's just how I feel. I more often see maladaptive daydreamers describe this experience as than like they physically can't do it. Although I suppose that does happen to some people. Like I said before, maladaptive daydreaming is generally incompatible with socializing. So people who feel like if they go out, they will start daydreaming and embarrass themselves, or hurt other people with their behavior, they might feel like they can't go out, like they shouldn't inflict themselves on other people. They're all weird. This is a weird test. If someone wakes you from daydreaming, how hard would you say you try to get back to daydreaming again? I think this one is asking about the urge. Like I it says it's based on the maladaptive daydreaming test, which I'm assuming they mean the MDS-16. And when you read the question that most closely corresponds to this in the MDS-16, it's it's worded how strong is the urge to return. It's asking you about the yearning for the daydreaming, which is I think what this one's asking. How hard would you say you try to get back to it? I try my best to continue the dream. Sometimes I try to go back to dreaming. I move on with my day. It has never happened to me. Again, they're using the language of night dreams interchangeably with daydreaming. Makes me question what they're asking. For a second, like I can I can use my context clues and figure it out, I think, but this test asked us to answer these questions accurately and honestly, and it has not used the language that would be best to get an accurate and honest response out of us. They were not diligent in making their own questions accurate. So, would you say you've woken up with an intense feeling after daydreaming? Again, we need some accuracy. What is this intense feeling that you're asking about? What is it meant to be? Because right off the bat, like I'm thinking of two things that are completely different. One, daydreaming crash. That happens a lot to maladaptive daydreamers. The crash is kind of it's sort of an umbrella term for a lot of things that can happen. When you're coming out of daydreaming or coming down from daydreaming, if you want to use the language of addiction. Negative symptoms, sometimes they can be likened to withdrawal type symptoms. It can feel jittery, it can feel like depression, it can feel sad and hopeless, and it's just a myriad of negative feelings. It can be a lot of things, and it's pretty intense. Sometimes it's just kind of sad, but sometimes it can get really intense and really upsets people. The other thing I'm thinking of is, just carryover, just residual emotion. Maladaptive daydreams tend to be an emotional experience. And sometimes that emotion that you're experiencing in the daydream can carry over into real life. The body is the body and the brain is the brain. And just because it's not actually right in front of you doesn't mean your body and your mind isn't reacting like it is. So if you are daydreaming, a very sad scene, and then you stop daydreaming, that sadness can carry over. If you are daydreaming a very happy scene and you stop daydreaming, maybe you're in a good mood the rest of the day, that it can carry over into your waking life a little bit. I have never experienced this intensely, this carryover. I've experienced it, sure, but just not intensely. And I have to assume that residual emotion from the daydream is what they're talking about in this question. So I'm going to answer it like that's what they're talking about, even though I'm not entirely sure. And I don't think it matters. If you're the type of daydreamer who has that carryover and it is intense, or if you're the type of daydreamer who has that carryover and it's just, meh. Or if you're someone whose daydreams and daydream emotion stays really contained, like this is another thing that maladaptive daydreamers can experience is all that emotion is contained within your daydream. When you come back to reality, you're not feeling strong emotions. There's a certain amount of numbness for a lot of people in the real world, where in the daydream they can have high ups and downs. So there might not be any carryover at all. You're experiencing emotion in the daydream and then you're in reality and it's just numb. So I don't see how this is a sign of someone being a maladaptive daydreamer, when the reality of maladaptive daydreamers is that there's too much variety for this to be telltale sign. My daydreaming has affected my social and professional life. Do you agree with this statement? Yes, I strongly agree, maybe, but not 100% agree, not really, or not at all. I think this question is fine. I think it's weird that they paired social and professional together like that. I think they should have done and slash or, because it can affect one and not the other. You might do excellent in your professional life. You are able to set aside the daydreaming and really buckle down and get your work done and you're excelling in your field. Fantastic. But, you do that at the expense of your social life. You put all of the time that you are existing in reality into your professional life and you leave nothing for your social life. All the time that you would put into a social life, you reserve for daydreaming. So you go to work, you go home, you start daydreaming. And I did that for a long time. I was great at my job. My coworkers liked me, my clients liked me, I was good at it. I like didn't go out. I didn't have any friends. I would go home and I would just start daydreaming. So I don't like that they paired them together. I wish they had split those into an and slash or thing. Do most of your daydreams repeat themselves? I feel like I dream the same dream. Sometimes I feel like this. It has happened to me once. I don't remember daydreams. Um, I don't think it matters. It doesn't matter. Some daydreamers do. Some daydreamers dream the same scene over and over and over again, and maybe it lasts a few minutes, maybe it lasts a couple hours. Maybe the entire story, is a few weeks long. But ultimately, when they get to the end of that story, it's just going to repeat and repeat and repeat. Maybe a few details here and there, or a character here and there are changed or swapped out, but it's essentially the same daydream over and over and over. Others will just daydream something unfolding endlessly and never really. I mean, I do that. I have a paracosm. I have the same paracosm that I started when I was 5 years old, and I've had it for over 30 years now. And it just keeps going and going and going and going. When you have something going and going that long, yeah, there's going to be stories that get repeated. There's going to be themes that are repeated and plots that are repeated. It's just going to happen. But it's not, I don't think it's repeating in the sense that this question means repeating. And both people, all else being equal, both people would equally be a maladaptive daydreamer, assuming they're maladaptive daydreamers. I think you know what I mean. The content of the daydream doesn't really matter that much. The style in which you do it doesn't really matter that much. The details of it don't really matter that much. It can be something that's repeating or it can be something that is endlessly renewing, and it makes no difference to whether or not your daydreaming is maladaptive. So, stupid question. I don't want to be too harsh on, the person here, but it has nothing, it can't tell you anything about if somebody's a maladaptive daydreamer or not. And there's no option for someone like me to even answer. I feel like I dream the same dream. Sometimes I feel like this. It has happened to me once, or I don't remember my daydreams. There's no option for this, simply doesn't happen to me. Would you say that you spend hours just daydreaming and doing nothing else? I'm always daydreaming. I daydream a lot, but I also get other work done. Not every day, or I haven't even thought of that. So I think this one also kind of runs into like there are different types of maladaptive daydreamers. I'm always daydreaming. There is a subset of maladaptive daydreamers who feel like they never actually stop daydreaming. They are just able to turn it down every once in a while, but it's always sitting right there in the back of their mind, kind of still going. I daydream a lot, but I can also get other work done. Like that, I think the type of daydreamer where it's always going would have trouble choosing between these two. And then, you have people who need to dedicate time to just daydreaming. Like they can't do it while they're doing something else. So they will not do other things and they will just daydream. That is a thing that happens too. I do both. I'm one of those people where it's kind of always playing. It's gotten a lot better as I've been, working on it. But I'll also have, just daydreaming dedicated time at its height. Like I would do nothing else, nothing else. I wouldn't even work on autopilot. I would just daydream. That's it for many, many hours. I can still do that if I'm having a real bad, time of it. But yeah, I think that one's a little difficult to answer. And I also want to say about it that there is no magic number. We've said this a lot on this channel. If you've seen any of my other videos, it's probably come up at some point. no magic number that you have to hit. Like there is not a threshold of hours that you need to break in order to be considered a maladaptive daydreamer. It's a lot more about the quality of those daydreams and how they are affecting your real life. So you might feel like you're coming in with a really low number compared to the people around you, but that can't tell you anything about how those hours are affecting you. If those hours are the most important hours of your day, you're still going to have a substantial negative impact on your life. As much as somebody who maybe daydreams a lot more hours than you, but they're daydreaming outside of hours that are, important to the quality of their life. So, yes, maladaptive daydreamers do tend to engage in these um, fantasies longer than non-maladaptive daydreamers for longer chunks of time, for a longer amount of their day, but you can't tell by just the amount of hours. Do you daydream more than once a day? That is a ridiculous question, and I don't even know where to start with that one. Okay, so again, our test giver person did not define daydreaming. There's studies, um, I believe by Jerome Singer, which the stat comes from that the average person or the average American, the study was done on Americans, daydreams for 50% of their day. And since it's a study, they did define what they meant by daydreaming. Um, and it was actually really broad. It was not just the deep fantasy that maladaptive daydreamers are accustomed to. It was also, casual fantasy and just, mind wandering and off task thought and, you know, all these things. I mean, and that's average. That's average. That's not a maladaptive daydreamer. That's not even an immersive daydreamer. That's Joe Blow off the street. And then, what if you do have a maladaptive daydreamer? Let's say we're comparing to a maladaptive daydreamer. Um, who daydreams 16 hours a day, but they only daydream once. They just did a 16-hour-long binge, but it's one daydream. You know what I mean? Like, how many times a day doesn't seem like a question that's going to get us anywhere. So, not really sure what to do with this one. The answers are more than 2 or 3 times a day, not all the time. I only daydream once every month or a couple of months, or I don't daydream. No one only daydreams once every month or a couple of months. It's just not how the human body works. But people daydream. That's it's the brain. It's the brain. So this tester, it must have meant deep immersive fantasy, but what they're testing for is if the person is experiencing deep immersive fantasy, specifically in a maladaptive way. All right, we're intermission. Intermission. This is intermission. So I plugged in my laptop. Where were we? Do you daydream more than once a day? Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. Weird question. I feel like I should have called this out sooner because at the bottom of a few of the questions were like, I don't daydream was a response. And I feel like that's a really weird response. But I guess I kind of get why people put on these quizzes and things like that because people do say that. Like in real life, every once in a while, you'll run into somebody who just says, yeah, I don't daydream. And it's wild. It's wild, and I hate to invalidate what someone is telling me about their lives because I hate it when people do that to me, but I kind of don't believe them. I feel like more often it's that vagueness of terms that we're running into where like everybody has this understanding of what daydreaming is, but it's not the same understanding across all people and certainly not the same understanding um, that like a scientific paper might have. So I feel like when you have somebody who's answering, "Oh, I don't daydream," what they probably mean is I don't experience what society has led me to believe daydreaming is. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Um, maybe people have this idea that daydreaming is inherently visual. You see an image or a scenario in your mind's eye, but there are a lot of people who don't. They just don't. They don't think in pictures. So maybe that's one explanation for why somebody would say that they don't daydream. Or maybe their idea of daydreaming is the way that maladaptive daydreamers mean it, or it means to them deep fantasy. When daydreaming can just as easily imply off task thought, So they're like, well, I don't have silly deep fantasies where, I'm riding a dragon into the sunset, so therefore I don't daydream. Next question. Do you feel distressed whenever you realize that you can't daydream as much as you want to? Absolutely. I wish I could daydream all the time. I feel a little frustrated, maybe once in a while, or I've never felt this way. This one looks a lot more like one of the questions that you would see on the maladaptive daydreaming scale. It's worded differently. I can't remember what the exact wording is, and I'm not going to look it up right now, but it's essentially the same, except for that weird part on the end where, as much as you want to. Because we're testing for maladaptive daydreaming. So want to doesn't really come into the equation. Even if you don't want to, you will. But overall, coming down to it, I don't think this is a terrible question. I don't think the answers are terrible. And it's definitely not the worst question we've seen. What would you say triggers your daydreaming phases? What does that mean? What is a phase? Everything seems to send me daydreaming. Environmental sensory triggers, mostly boredom, or nothing triggers it for me. From the context that the answers have given me, I think phases just means a daydreaming episode, binge, session, scenario. What triggers, your daydreaming. Probably they really I don't think even needed to put phases on the end of that. Just they could have ended that at daydreaming, and I think I think it would have been easier to understand actually if they had omitted that word. Everything seems to send me daydreaming. So we have everything's a trigger, nothing's a trigger, boredom, or environmental sensory triggers. I feel like it's strange that boredom is the only like emotional state that they put on here. If they were going to put emotional states on here, boredom is a big one. It's a very big one, so it makes sense to be on this list. But stress is also a very big one, and stress is not anywhere on this list. Environmental sensory triggers. I'm not really sure what that means. I'm going to assume that that probably means something like media or music. Music and media are also two massive triggers that are not explicitly stated on this list. Have to assume that that's what they mean by environmental sensory triggers. And then you have everything and nothing. And this brings up a subtype of daydreamer that we talked about before, that one that always has it going. Those types of people will usually say one of two things. They'll usually say, "Oh, yeah, everything is a trigger for me. It never stops." Or they'll say, "I don't have any triggers. It just never stops." So they could kind of, which is, the kind of the type of daydreamer that I am. So I feel like I could comfortably answer. Like, I feel like there's two answers for me on this. Um, 4, I feel like there's 4 answers for me on this. I feel like all of those things could be a trigger. Everything in my life is not a trigger, so everything doesn't cover it, but, like, all of the ones on this particular list do. Sometimes nothing triggers me, it just goes. Boredom triggers me. Music and media, if that's what we assume sensory triggers are, will. I think the question is fine. The answers are not that great. And the way that this test has been set up so far, the last answer is always like some form of this doesn't apply to me. So nothing triggers it for me is a true statement for a lot of maladaptive daydreamers. But I believe that on this test, what it actually means is this question does not apply to me. And that's not true. Like, I would choose nothing triggers it for me. That is an accurate and honest description of how a lot of my maladaptive daydreaming experience is. That's not what it means to this test. So, do you get a great rush of dopamine when you daydream? Okay. 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 I can see where this one is going, but I think it's a little strange that we see dopamine talked about constantly. If you've been around maladaptive daydreaming communities and seen a lot of posts and stuff, you'll see that the dopamine comes up every once in a while. And I'm not saying that it's not true that daydreaming can't or doesn't trigger some sort of dopamine rush. I'm sure it does. But that's not the only feel good chemical in the body, you know. If I got a rush, how would I, as a layperson whose head is not in a scanner currently or anything, how would I know that that's dopamine? Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. Like, could it be serotonin rather than dopamine? Like, this seems needlessly specific. I think this question would have made a lot more sense if they had just kind of used a general, um, they could have just got rid of that and said, "Do you get a rush?" Again, I wish they would have, defining rush. I guess they did define rush actually. They defined it with dopamine. I just don't know how a layperson would know if they're experiencing a rush of dopamine versus any kind of other rush of feel goodedness. All the time. I do feel relaxed sometimes, not all the time, or I have never. So I want to answer this question in the affirmative because daydreaming does fulfill me in certain way. It's satisfying to engage in, which I think is the core of this question. Does your daydreaming bring some sort of positive feeling to the table for you? And it does. I don't know if that's dopamine, and I don't feel like I personally experience it as a rush. It is not like chasing a high in my personal experience. It can be for other people. Plenty of people experience what they describe as a rush. Um, and they probably have an easier time answering this question than I am. What would you say is the central theme of all your daydreams? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. We talked about it before. No one cares. It doesn't matter. That said, let's see what they think. The ideal life, about things that don't exist, scenes from movies, or I don't even remember. Yeah, I mean, those are all themes that maladaptive daydreamers have. Well, I mean, not the I don't remember one, but ideal life, things that don't exist, or scenes from movies. Maladaptive daydreamers also daydream about real life scenarios, about violence, about what hurt comfort, about unideal lives of just daily boring life. um Fantastical things that do exist. Celebrity is a huge one, or having celebrity, having being celebrity. I guess that would be something that doesn't exist though. But I feel like they mean fictional things, like dragons and elves and stuff like that. I would also say scenes from movies. You could probably fold in television shows or creepypastas or whatever, and with that too, just scenes from media, visual media probably. But I mean, I would include books and stuff in that. But again, we have to read a lot into this question. If what your theme isn't the ideal life, things that don't exist, the question doesn't matter to whether or not you have maladaptive daydreaming, and the answers are extremely incomplete. What kind of childhood did you have? I used to be a loner. I wasn't the most friendly person. I had a normal childhood or nothing from the ordinary. I feel like the last two are the same, right? A normal childhood would be nothing out of the ordinary. It doesn't say out of the ordinary though. It says nothing from the ordinary. So yeah, I would say those are the same, right? Those are exactly the same. I wasn't the most friendly person, or I used to be a loner. So again, you either you either have to be a loner, You have to be unfriendly or you had a normal childhood. They're just incomplete. I understand there's only 4 choices that you can fill out, or I assume that this quiz, there's only been 4, so the quiz probably only gives you 4 answers when you're creating it. Um, but these just are tragically incomplete in a way that makes it so that a lot of people can't even answer this question, you know? I mean, what if you had an abnormal childhood and you're an extrovert, you know, like it's not a lot of room here. So when I read the question, I thought this was going to be a question about trauma. There's this big stat in maladaptive daydreaming that 25% of MDers have a history of childhood trauma. Um, so I thought that's what this question was going to be about, but then there's nothing uh, in the questions that asks about that in any way. Um, the other 75% of maladaptive daydreamers, on the flip side, uh, do describe, they say it's a normal or uneventful childhoods. So we did have an option for that, but not for the flip side. And I guess maybe that's not what this question was about anyway. So I think it's strange. Feel like the answer that this question wants is that you were a loner as a child. Would your daydreaming interfere with your professional life a lot? Shouldn't it be does? Does your daydreaming interfere with your professional life? Maybe it's assuming you don't have a professional life yet. If this was made by a teenager for other teenagers, I don't know. Answer is yes, I have been told. Maybe sometimes it's distracting. I wouldn't say so, or it has never happened. Again, I don't feel like any of these apply to me. Yes, it interferes with my professional life, but the yes option here has I have been told tacked to it. What does that mean? I have been told. I haven't been told that it interferes with my professional life. I have personally observed that it interferes with my professional life. No one had to tell me. So that's strange. Have you confused your daydreaming with real life incidents? So if you remember way back at the beginning of this video, which is way too long, they said in their introduction that maladaptive daydreamers conflate fantasy and reality, which doesn't happen. And I went on a rant about how that is not the case. And it's not. But there's a caveat there. Minor confusion does happen. It happens in the way that it does with night dreaming, where you'll be, sitting there and you'll be like, oh, wait, did I tell Jill that, or did I just think about telling Jill that? Or you'll be reflecting back on something, you'll be like, wait, did I actually do that, or did I just dream that I did that? There's that kind of confusion, that level of confusion. It happens. Um, you know, things will get a little mixed up, but uh not to any really alarming degree. Not unless, not unless you have something else going on with you. If this is happening to you all of the time, uh you should look into other things. It might not be maladaptive daydreaming, or it might be maladaptive daydreaming and something else. Something extra is going on there that's not particularly tied to the maladaptive daydreaming itself. This is not an inherent quality of maladaptive daydreaming. Um, some confusion is normal. Like I said a second ago, a little bit leaks in there from time to time, but it shouldn't be anything that's super common, Question 18. We are almost done. You tend to move your body around in real life when you daydream. For example, your fingers walking around, etc. This is a normal question. If you're trying to figure out if somebody's a maladaptive daydreamer, it doesn't happen to everybody, but it does happen often. There are 2 types of movement in maladaptive daydreaming: um, kinesthetic or repetitive motion, and or sympathetic motion. The kinesthetic is the repetitive motion. That's the pacing, the twirling, the swinging, the jumping, the hand flailing, any leg bouncing, whatever, anything like that, anything that's repetitive. Um, and that is sort of a trigger, I guess. that maintains or enhances the daydreaming state. The sympathetic movement is just, your brain is sending an impulse to do the thing that you're thinking about. So you are watching a sad scene, or you're in a sad scene in your daydream and you're crying, or your character is crying, and in real life you are also crying, or you are also laughing, or you're in a sword fight and in real life, your arm kind of swings. I'm going to guess that they're talking about the repetitive type movement. They said walking around, which I assume they mean pacing, which is the most common one. And then they add moving your fingers in there just to let you know, like, there's other things than just pacing, which is true. I often find myself making hand gestures. I was told I do, not that I can remember, or I don't even daydream. So it's weird. It's weird that they went for hand gestures and not the pacing. The pacing is by far the most common. People do hand gestures, but the big one is pacing, like 76 or 79. I can't remember off the top of my head. Percent of maladaptive daydreamers pace. No, I am wrong. I'm misremembering that stat. I think it's 79% of maladaptive daydreamers have a repetitive movement. And then there's a subset of those, I can't remember the subset of those, but it's pretty high, like 65, I'll just say off the top of my head. Of those, of that 79 are pacers. And then all the other movements are divvied up among other things, the swinging, rocking, hand gestures. So yeah, that's weird. That's weird that they didn't even go for the one that's actually super common. I was told I do, which would imply that the person making the repetitive movement doesn't know they're doing the repetitive movement. Usually they do. Sympathetic movements you might not notice. Someone, you'll be sitting there and not know that you're doing it, and somebody will be like, "Why are you mad?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm not mad." Or, "Why are you laughing?" Be like, "Oh, I just remembered something funny." Um, because you were making the faces of your daydream, but you weren't aware that you were doing it. So now we have a repetitive one, a sympathetic one. I Because I do sympathetic movements, but I don't do repetitive movements. I'm part of the 21% of maladaptive daydreamers that don't have a repetitive movement. So I think I'm gonna go with I was told I do, because that's the one that I feel like indicates sympathetic movement. When you daydream, do you see yourself as the central character of the dream? Does not matter. Doesn't matter. No one cares. Sometimes I feel like I'm fading away. Oh my god. Ooh, I got really dark all of a sudden. Wow. Came at me. I'm not even in my daydreams, and sometimes I feel like I'm fading away. It does not involve me. Oh wait, it does involve me, but it does not always. All daydreams are about me, or I don't remember dreams. Oh, it says all dreams are about me, or I don't remember dreams. I don't know why I had such a hard time reading this one, sorry. Okay, so that doesn't apply to me one at the bottom, and then all dreams are about me. It does involve me, but not always, and sometimes I feel like I'm fading away. I feel like sometimes I feel like I'm fading away is the option that's meant for I'm not in my daydreams, which is a stupid way of putting it. It doesn't fit with anything else in, like, the tone of this quiz. That's gotta be the one it is, though. Or is it sometimes I feel like I'm fading away because I don't match up to the me in my daydreams? Is that what it means? No, because it asks, "Do you see yourself as the central character?" So that has to be the one that means you're not the central character. It's that I mean, I think that's the only one that somebody who doesn't daydream about themselves can answer. I just feel like, okay, people who aren't in their daydreams are gonna have no idea how the hell they answer this. And people who are in their daydreams are gonna be like, "Yes, but it's not me, but it's sometimes I feel like there's too many buts on it. And it doesn't matter." Okay, finally. Question 20. I don't even want to open my eyes and see what it is. It's the last one. Are you emotionally attached to the people that appear in your daydreams? This can be an indication of maladaptive daydreaming. Maladaptive daydreaming, one of the absolute must have traits is that it is immersive and vivid in some capacity. That capacity is not always emotional, but it is often emotional. So this can be a sign of maladaptive daydreaming that you are emotionally attached to the characters. So finally, we have a question that matters. It's not a surefire sign. Like there are plenty of maladaptive daydreamers who couldn't give a shit about their characters. They'll kill them for the sake of the story and not think twice about it. They're not emotionally attached to the character aspect of maladaptive daydreaming. They're more attached to maybe the story or something and don't actually give a crap about the characters specifically. Um, so it's not true for everyone, but it's true for enough people that I would expect it to come up when you're talking to somebody about like, could it be maladaptive daydreaming? Well, here's one of the common things. Do you relate to that? And then the answer is either yes, and you're like, oh, okay, well, they'll throw that in the yes bin, or they'll say no, and they're like, oh, okay, well, you know, not everybody does. So either you have all these other things that point towards maladaptive daydreaming, and you continue on without that specific one, or you have all these things that point to it's just one more in the pile of things that point away from maladaptive daydreaming, and then you're better able to pursue, an alternative for what's going on with you. But yeah, it's definitely a question that I feel like is normal to come up. So, yay. Okay, I was really worried about that last one. I thought it was gonna be something crazy, but it's actually something fairly normal. I would agree, only some of them. I don't remember every character, or I don't know anyone in my daydream. I would agree, only some. I don't remember every character. What does remembering them have to do with anything? Um, I'm deeply emotionally attached to my characters. I don't remember all of them. There's so goddamn many, and this thing's been going on for like 35 years. I know I've forgotten more characters than I currently have. You know what I mean? I don't remember them all. It's been a long time. I would agree. I guess, yeah. You know what? It doesn't matter. So yeah, I don't see what that reply has to do with anything. Or I don't know anyone in my dream. You can know them and not be emotionally attached to them. So those last two I feel like are throwaways that don't really mean anything. And it doesn't really give you a no option. It gives you I don't know anyone, but you can know them and not be attached to them. There's no proper I don't feel like there's a proper no answer. No, I'm not emotionally attached to them. The Like I said, the results do not matter. It's not why we did this. But I'm going to read out the result I got just to see if there's anything worth commenting on in there. You seem to probably be struggling with MAD. Sometimes you might confuse reality with the fantasy world you are daydreaming about. This condition may also make you dissociate from the real world and make you want to push people away from your personal and professional life. It can also be a cause of distraction for your career and also your social life. Usually, the reason for MAD is a past traumatic experience, and maladaptive daydreaming is the coping mechanism developed as a result. So, we said this stat before that 25 roughly percent of maladaptive daydreamers have a history of childhood trauma. And that's a lot of people, you know, that's a full quarter of our entire population, but is not usually. I think I have a whole video on like maladaptive daydreaming and trauma and why this idea persists that maladaptive daydreaming is almost always caused by trauma. Um, it's not. It can be caused, there are a lot of pathways to maladaptive daydreaming. Trauma is a big one that gets talked about a lot. And, so yeah, so this idea persists that maladaptive daydreaming is always or almost always caused by trauma. This person uses the word usually, but it's not. It's can be caused by trauma. It's often caused by trauma. 25%, is a full quarter of us. It's a decent chunk of people. But it's not usually 75% of maladaptive daydreamers say, I had a uneventful childhood or something ordinary childhood, whatever. And here we are just seeing that I don't want to say stereotype because it's not really a stereotype. What a misconception, maybe? It's not even a full misconception because it is kind of common. It's just misstated, but it's not accurate to the reality of maladaptive daydreaming. Lots of maladaptive daydreamers don't have trauma. They just or childhood trauma anyway, trauma that led to their maladaptive daydreaming. So yeah, there we go. It even ended badly. It's not a good test. It's not a good test at all. I thought I'd have a lot more fun taking it. Usually I have fun with these things. I feel like I was kind of a wet blanket on this one. But yeah, moral of the story, all these tests are lame. Don't bother with them unless you're just doing it for a laugh. They are shockingly bad. Yeah, so that was fun. I'll see you guys in the next video, I guess. If there's any fun, like I want to have fun with these. If there's any fun content out there, I don't even care what they are, videos, memes, silly tests, anything at all. Send them to me. Okay. Bye.